In the previous Part 1 video, we have created this simple routing-based React application. And we have seen how to create basic Webpack configuration to handle that. So here, we're using .js extension for JSX-related files. But if you use Vue.js, you might know that it uses .jsx extension. So let's use that extension now. Using JSX extension helps to clarify that the file is using React.js code. As you can see, we're getting an error now, because we need to make some configuration changes. So let's first change the entry file extension. For Babel loader, let's specify either .js or .jsx extension. So only .js and .jsx files will be converted using Babel.js. Now, we're done with the extension changes. Let's run the build again and see what error comes. As you can see, we're getting error, can't resolve ./app file. This is because by default Webpack only considers .js extension, and if you want to use any other extension, you need to specify that in the configuration file. So to fix this error, we need to use the resolve property and specify the list of extensions we want to use in an array. Here, we will specify .js and .jsx. You can find this configuration in the Webpack website also. Under Documentation, and then Configuration section. As you can see, you can configure much more here. Now, after making this configuration change, let's run the build script again. As you can see, the build is successful. Let's start the application now by running npm run start command, which will execute the Webpack serve command to start the Webpack dev server. And if we access the application on localhost port 5000, we should see the working application. Now, let's use some images to the code and see if that works. To save time, I have created images folder inside src folder and added 3 images inside it. So I have imported the first animation image as you can see here. And we can use it in the home component using img tag. As soon as I save, you can see error for telling to use appropriate loader to handle this type of file. So to parse the images, we need a loader because image files are binary files. To fix this issue, we need to install FileLoader npm package using npm install FileLoader with savedev flag. Now, in the rules array we can add another loader rule for all the files with specific extensions. We can say, all files that ends with .jpeg and .jpg. If you have PNG or SVG extension files, you can add them also. So all the files that ends with any of these extensions will be resolved by the file loader. And we also need to add loader property with the name of the loader, in this case, file loader. Now, if we start the application again, we should not get any error. As you can see, image is correctly getting displayed without any error. Let's give some class to so we can adjust its width and height. And in index.scss, we can add some CSS for that class. You can see, the image is smaller now. Let's add other images for the profile and about component. Now, we can copy the image tag and use it for other images. And here, instead of animation, we will use delicious food. For profile component, we will use digital marketing image. Let's verify it now. You can see, images are correctly getting displayed. Now, let's inspect the page and open the Network tab. Click on the All menu and we can filter the files by name bundle. So this bundle.js is showing as 390 KB and its actual size is 1.7 megabytes as you can see. If I go to Sources tab and expand the Webpack tutorial, you can see the actual code we have written. So every JSX code is converted to React.createElement call. If I open the app.jsx file and see the home component, you can see we have h2 with home component text. The same code is converted to React.createElement call as can be seen here. But with this code, it's not easy to debug the application if there is some error and you have a lot of code. Let's say, in the home component, I'm logging test variable which does not exist. And if I go to home page, you will see an error saying, test is not defined. If I click on the link, it goes directly to the code, and with these create element calls, it's not easy to debug if you have some complex code. So to fix this, we can use DevTool property to enable better quality source maps. So for this property, we can provide one of the value from these list of values. This column indicates if we can use it in production. As you can see here, this is the recommended choice for development builds for higher quality source maps. So we can use this eval source map. To do that, in Webpack config file, we can add DevTool property with the value of eval source map. Now, let's start the application again. So whenever we change any Webpack configuration, we need to rerun the start script. If we check the application now, we still get that error, but if we click on the file link, you can see it's the original code that we wrote. So this code is easy to debug during development rather than the create element call converted code. Now, let's remove that console.log to remove the error. With no error, let's check the bundle.js file now. You can see that the file is a 4.2 MB size, which is much larger than the previous version because now it contains our original code. So while developing the application, always use the eval source map. Now, let's deploy this application to production. Before deploying, we need to build using npm run build command. In public folder, you can see the images and bundle.js file created which we can deploy to production. So, let's go to netlify.com and log in with your GitHub account. If you don't have an account, you can sign up using GitHub. Once logged in, click on Sites menu, add New Sites button and then select Deploy Manually option. Now, click Browse to Upload link and select the public folder to upload. Click on Upload button and within few seconds, our website will be live. As you can see, the application is deployed now, and if we click on the application link, you will be able to see the application live. And we're able to access the routes without any issue. However, the deployed URL is not easy to remember, so let's change that. Go to Site Settings and click on Change Site Name button. We can give any name we want and click on Save button. Now, we can navigate to this URL and everything should still work. But there is one issue when we refresh any of the route. We get page not found error. So if you go to any route which is not homepage and refresh it, you will get that error. A similar error we fixed locally in the previous part of this Webpack series by adding the History API fallback option for the Webpack dev server configuration. But when we build our application using build command, we get HTML, JavaScript, CSS files created which does not use Webpack dev server. So whenever we hit any URL in the browser, the request goes to the server, in this case, it's Netlify server. So to handle that, specific to Netlify, you need to add _redirects file in the public folder. I have already published an article on FreeCodeCamp, which explains the same in detail. You can find that link in the description of this video. So to fix the issue, let's create the _redirects file in the public folder with these contents inside it. Now, with this configuration, we will deploy the application again. Click on the Deploys menu and upload the public folder again. You can see _redirects file added. As you can see, changes are deployed. Let's refresh the page and verify it. So we have fixed the issue and there is no error even after refreshing the page. So that _redirects file is required specific for Netlify when you deploy any routing-based React application to Netlify. So in that file, we're saying for any invalid route, redirect to index.html file, which is our React application. Whenever we're working on an actual project, we don't write all the code in a single app.jsx file. Instead, we create separate folders for each component. So let's create home folder inside components folder, and we will move the home component code to that file. Let's create home.jsx file and we will paste the code inside it. Now, we can export this component as a default export. We also need to import the animation file. Animation.jpg. Now, we can import the home.jsx file and app component. From components/home folder. Let's run the application now and verify the functionality. As you can see, image is correctly getting displayed without any issue. But if you check the import statement, we're using multiple dots and we always need to check which folder we're in, and depending on that, those numbers of dots need to be added, which is cumbersome. To fix this, we can add a Webpack configuration. As you can see, I have added alias property inside the resolve property, and instead of src, I will use another name. So let's say instead of adding any of these dots, I just want to say images/name of the image and it should work. And I should also not get any error. As you can see, we're getting error that the file cannot be found. So I will say images:/path.join__dir_name, and from the current file directory, I want to go inside src and then the images folder. So now, anytime we say images/something, it will find the file in the src/images folder. So this image's name we're using to refer to the src/images folder. And now, if we restart the application, we should not get any error. You can see, homepage image is correctly getting displayed. Now, let's move the profile component into its own folder. Instead of creating profile folder first and then file, you can just click on the file icon and enter profile/profile.jsx, which will do the same thing. And now we can paste the copied code. Let's export this component as a default export. Here, we're using delicious food image, so let's import that. And instead of dot/images, we can just use images. Now, let's import that component into the app.jsx file. We can do the same thing for about component. We will also move the header component to its own folder. As you can see, the code is a lot simplified and easy to understand. So this is the actual folder structure used in industry projects to separate out each component into its own folder. Now let's say I have a constants file in utils folder with name constants.js. Note that the extension is .js and not JSX because we will not be writing any JSX code inside it. Here, I will export a single constant with name default_username and I will give it a value of guest. And I will use this constant in header.jsx file. Let's say, I want to display a greeting message to welcome with that name. Here also you can see we need to use double dots. So we can add another alias in the configuration file to fix this issue. We will name it src, and instead of src/images, we will just use src. Now, in the header component, I don't need to use double dots. I can just use src instead. Now, I can restart the application again. So now no matter how much deep any component is nested, we can always use path starting from the src folder. So you will never need to add double dots for referencing any of the file from src folder from now onwards. As you can see, welcome guest is correctly getting displayed. So this is how you can simplify your import statements using alias property in Webpack configuration. You can learn more about many other configurations in the Webpack documentation. The resolve property has a lot of properties you can use. One of them is extensions property, which we have already seen. Let's now see how to use environment variables in React application. To demo that, I will use Code Sandbox to create React application. Now, I will create a .env file in the root of the project. The .env file is used to store your private information like passwords, API keys, and so on. Let's say we have a public API key which we need in our application. We should not store any private information in the .env file of React application as it will not remain private. So if I have a public API key variable with value of, let's say, some API key, and if you prefix the variable name with React_app_, then that variable we can access directly in our React application without any configuration. Now, in the app.js file, I can access that variable through process.env.name of that variable. And if you check the console, you can see some API key value is correctly getting displayed. So any environment variable you have prefixed with React_app_ can be accessed in the entire React application through process.env object. Now, let's try to use the environment variables in our Webpack application and see if it works. Let's create a .env file and create the same environment variable here also. Now, I will try to access this variable from app.jsx file. And I will restart the application. Whenever you create a .env file or change something in the .env file, you need to restart the application for that change to get reflected. Now, let's check the application now. As you can see, we're getting a blank screen, which means there is some error. We're getting error, process is not defined. So by default, process is not available, and to make it available, we need to add some configuration. As you are aware now, this is a Node.js file, so we can use .env npm package to access environment variables. You can see, it's a very popular npm package. So we can install it using npm install.env with savedev flag. We're using savedev because we will not be directly using it in our source code. Now, you can see the package is added in the dev dependencies section of the package.json file. Now, we will import that .env npm package in the Webpack config file. And we will call the config method from it, so all the variables we have declared in the .env file will be accessible inside this file. Now, I will access the environment variable from .env file in this config file. Let's start the application again. As you can see, that variable value displayed in the console. But I don't want to access that variable in the config file, but I want it in the app.jsx file. So if I add that console log again, I will again get that error. So to send these environment variables from this file to our entire application, we can add a new plugin configuration in the plugins array. Here, we can add new Webpack.define plugin. And inside it we need to define a key with name process.env, and for the value we will pass stringified version of all the environment variables. Using JSON.stringify method. So when we pass process.env, it includes all the variables defined in the .env file. So you might have multiple environment variables in the .env file. Let's say another API key with another key as the value. So no matter how many environment variables you have, all of these will be accessible through the process.env object. As process.env contains all the environment variables of your system as well as added by the .env file. So if I just print process.env, you will see all the environment variables printed in the console. You can see all the operating system environment variables are also displayed along with those which we added in .env file. So when we pass all the variables using JSON.stringified method and pass it as a plugin, we can access it in our entire application. So now, in app.jsx file, I can print both of the environment variable values. As you can see, we're successfully able to access them in our React application. In the next and final part of this series, we will optimize this application for production with different configuration files and deploy it to production.